Humans are fascinated by gore and violence, but even more so the mysterious and unsolved. This interest in disturbing and unpleasant subjects is called morbid curiosity, and it has gripped hundreds of people throughout the ages. I am one of those people. My name is Hallie, and this is the Morbid Curiosity Podcast. Though we are often led to believe otherwise, cemeteries are not for the dead. They are for the living, giving us a place to go and remember our loved ones, to honor the past and those that created our present. They are also places where fantastic art and architecture can be seen, and a place to get closer to celebrities and the makers of history. In America, burial after death is permanent, but in Europe, burial is often more temporary. Though customs differ across Europe, graves are more often used for a limited period of time. Ossuaries are chests, boxes, buildings, wells, or other sites that serve as the final resting place of human skeletal remains after they have been removed from their graves. Ossuaries are often used when burial space is scarce. A body is first buried in a temporary grave. Then, after several years, once the body has completely decayed and been reduced to a skeleton, the remains are moved to an ossuary. It's possible to store the remains of many more people in a single ossuary than in graves or separate tombs. Ossuaries were and are popular in many parts of Europe, and were part of the practice of several religions, including Zoroastrian in Persia around 3,000 years ago, Roman Catholicism in Italy, Spain, and France, in Eastern Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, and Judaism. Charnel houses are another place human skeletal remains are stored. A charnel house is a vault or building, often built near churches, where bones that are unearthed while digging new graves are deposited. Though the term charnel house can sometimes be used interchangeably with ossuary, the term has developed a more negative connotation. I was unable to discover the reason for this. The city of Paris, France, is particularly known for its more short-term burial practices due to the limited space. Most people rent a plot for between 5 and 50 years, after which time the grave is dug up and resold. The bodies, usually just skeletons after so long under the earth, are usually moved to ossuaries, and Paris is home to one of the most famous ossuaries in Europe, the Catacombs of Paris. The history of how the catacombs became what they are today is both gruesome and practical. But first, I want to summarize the history of the city itself to give you some context. Also, I want to apologize in advance for my pronunciation of the French language, as I'm not a native speaker. The name Paris is derived from the Roman name for the early inhabitants of the area, the Parisii. Paris is often referred to as La Ville Lumière, the City of Light, both because of its leading role during the Age of Enlightenment and for the more literal reason of being one of the first European cities to adopt gas street lighting. Before it was the capital of France, Paris had humble beginnings. The Parisii inhabited the area from the middle of the 3rd century BC. A major north-south trade route crossed the Seine at Ile de la Cité, a natural island, and the island gradually became an important trading center. In 52 BC, the Romans conquered the Paris basin. After making the island a garrison camp, they began extending their settlement in a more permanent way to Paris's left bank, the area on the southern side of the Seine. The Romans originally called the settlement Lutetia. It remained a prosperous city, and the Romans built a forum, baths, temples, theaters, and an amphitheater. By the end of the Western Roman Empire, the town was known as Paris. Christianity was introduced in the middle of the 3rd century AD by Saint Denis, the first bishop of Paris. According to legend, when he refused to renounce his faith before the Roman occupiers, he was beheaded on a hill that became known as Mons Martyrum, aptly meaning the Hill of Martyrs. It is said that after Denis was beheaded, he walked headless to the north of the city. The place where he finally fell dead became an important religious shrine, the Basilica of Saint-Denis, and many French kings are buried there. By the end of the 12th century, Paris had become the political, economic, religious, and cultural capital of France. The royal residence was located at the western end of Ile de la Cité. In 1163, during the reign of King Louis VIII, Maurice de Sully, Bishop of Paris, built the Notre Dame Cathedral and its eastern extremity. Paris's cultural center had begun to move to the right or northern bank after the draining of its former swampland made the land habitable and fit for crops. In 1137, a new city marketplace grew up, where the famous market of Les Halles is today. The English, led by King Henry V, took over Paris in 1420 and held it despite the efforts of Joan of Arc, who tried to liberate the city in 1429. In the later part of the 16th century, during the French Wars of Religion, a period of civil infighting and religious war between Roman Catholics and the Huguenots, Reformed Protestants, Paris was a Catholic stronghold. The conflicts ended when another Henry, King Henry IV, claimed the crown of France in 1594, after converting to Catholicism to gain entry into the capital. He made several improvements to the capital during his reign, but was assassinated in a narrow street by Les Halles marketplace in 1610. By 1780, the population of Paris had ballooned to around 650,000 people. The working-class neighborhood on the eastern side of the city grew more and more crowded with poor migrant workers from other regions of France. Even so, Paris was the center of the Age of Enlightenment, an explosion of philosophic and scientific activity. It was also the financial capital of Europe, the primary European center of book publishing, fashion, and the manufacture of luxury goods. However, all this luxury and expense didn't last. In the summer of 1789, the French Revolution erupted into the streets of Paris. A mob stormed the Bastille, a medieval fortress that had become a symbol of royal authority. Louis XVI and the royal family were brought to Paris and made virtual prisoners within the Tuileries Palace. As the revolution turned more and more radical, the king, queen, and the mayor were killed at the guillotine, along with more than 16,000 others throughout France during the Reign of Terror. The property of the aristocracy and the church was nationalized, and the city's churches were closed, sold, or demolished. A succession of revolutionary factions ruled Paris until the 9th of November, 1799, when Napoleon Bonaparte seized power as first consul. Before the French Revolution, a person's class had a lot to do with where they ended up after death. A noble, or someone who worked in the Catholic Church, might be buried beneath the floor of a large cathedral or church. The kings and queens were interred at the Basilique de Saint-Denis. Everyone else was buried in mass graves that were located just outside most churches. The most central of these mass grave cemeteries was a burial ground that surrounded the 5th century Notre Dame de Bois church. Around 1130, the burial ground became associated with the Church of the Saints Innocents. By the end of the 1100s, the principal Parisian marketplace, Les Halles, grew up nearby Saints Innocents. By that point, the cemetery was already full to overflowing. To make room for more burials, the long dead were exhumed, and their bones were packed into the roofs and walls of the charnier galleries, charnel houses, built inside the cemetery walls. This worked for a while, but by the end of the 18th century, The burial ground was a 2-meter-high mound of earth filled with centuries of dead Parisians, which came not only from the general populace, but also the Hôtel Dieu hospital and the city morgue. The mix of the stench of decaying bodies and the foods of the market was not pleasant nor safe. The French Revolution had sparked a newfound value of individuality and human rights, causing more Parisians to want permanent graves. Also, knowledge about the spread of disease was discovered around this time, making the cemetery problem even more apparent. Due to the overcrowding and the danger of sickness, the cemetery had to be emptied. But where would they move the bodies? Luckily, there were a large amount of abandoned mines that could be utilized for just such a purpose. Much of Paris sits upon rich limestone deposits. Most of the city was built with this stone, but it was mined just outside of it. Many of these mines, some of which were illicit, were uncharted, and when the supply of limestone was exhausted, they were often left abandoned and forgotten. As Paris grew, it annexed the suburbs around it, and by the 18th century, many of its arrondissements, or administrative districts, included previously mined territories. A series of mine cave-ins caused King Louis XIV to name a commission to investigate the state of the Parisian underground. This resulted in the creation of the Inspection of Mines Service. All intramuros burials, or burials within the city, were forbidden after 1780. This stopped graves from being added to the cemeteries, but the problem of what to do with the remains already crowding them was still unresolved. The need to move the packed cemeteries within the city became even more urgent on May 30th, 1780, when the basement wall of a property next door to a cemetery collapsed under the weight of the mass grave behind it. Long dead corpses literally burst like water from a broken dam into the basement. Renovations of the city's abandoned mines and the closure of cemeteries were both within the jurisdiction of the police prefect, Lieutenant General Alexandre Lenoir, who had also been involved in the creation of the Mine Inspection Service. Lenoir endorsed the idea of moving the Parisian dead into the subterranean passageways, which had been renovated in 1782. He decided to further renovate the mine passageways into an underground sepulchre, and the decision became law in 1785. A large well was dug within a building above one of the principal subterranean passageways in order to transport the remains of those buried in the cemetery of Les Innocents. The building itself was eventually turned into a sort of museum for all the headstones, sculptures, and other artifacts moved from the former cemetery. After an opening ceremony on the 7th of April, 1785, a route between Les Innocents and the Clos de la Tombe Issoire was established, and a procession of black cloth-covered wagons carrying the millions of Parisian dead became a nightly routine. It took several years to empty the majority of the Paris cemeteries, including Les Innocents. By the time all the bodies had been moved, 6 to 7 million corpses lay inside the abandoned mines. From that point on, the dead were buried directly in the catacombs ossuaries. Some famous and infamous historical characters rest in the catacombs, including Jean-Paul Marat, one of the French Revolution's most radical voices, and Maximilien de Robespierre, an influential figure during both the Revolution and the subsequent Reign of Terror. Around 1860, the city of Paris stopped moving bones into the catacombs. In the first few years of its existence, the catacombs were a disorganized repository of skeletons. Louis-Étienne de Thury, director of the Paris Mine Inspection Service in 1810, worked to transform the underground caverns into a mausoleum fit for visitors. Skulls and femurs were stacked into the patterns seen in the catacombs today. Thury also used what cemetery decorations he could save to complement the skeleton-lined tunnels. Monumental tablets and archways bearing inscriptions were added. These inscriptions included warnings, descriptions, and other comments about the nature of the ossuary. For the safety of future visitors, the catacombs were walled off from the rest of Paris's already extensive underground tunnel network. Today, about a mile of the catacombs is still open to visitors. As visitors move into the ossuary, they pass under an inscription above a doorway that says, "Stop. This is the Empire of Death." It takes about 45 minutes to walk through the catacombs and requires traversing many stairwells and dark passageways. Guides and audio guides are available, but not mandatory. There are many more miles of catacombs and tunnels under the city, but it's illegal to visit most areas outside the tourist area. That doesn't stop some brave urban explorers, but I'll get to that later. The bones in the catacombs are grouped by the names of the cemeteries they originally came from. Some groups are neatly stacked along the walls, others arranged in intricate patterns, creating crosses and other images. There are also sculptures created by the quarrymen years before the bodies were placed in the mines. The largest sculpture is a model of the fortress of Port Mahon, a large island town where it's possible the quarryman was held prisoner during the 7 Years' War. There's also an underground space used for themed exhibitions in the catacombs, such as a display of the minerals found in the mines and a gallery of skeletal elements with various pathologies, my personal area of extreme interest. Currently, the tunnels are open from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Tuesday through Sunday and cost around $11 for adults. The tunnels are chilly with a constant temperature of 57 degrees Fahrenheit, so if you visit, bring a jacket. There are people who love the catacombs, and then there are those who love them so much that the tourist area isn't enough for them anymore. Though it's illegal, cataphiles explore the off-limits sections of the catacombs. The place is a 400-mile, multi-level maze of tunnels scattered with human remains. There are few ways in or out other than the tourist entrance, and that's the only entrance within the city limits, thanks to the police sealing them up for safety reasons. There are no lights in the tunnels. Many of them are waterlogged, partially collapsed, or so thin that a person can barely pass through them. Some are labeled with the names of the streets that run above them, or spattered with graffiti from around the time of the Revolution. There are even several bunkers in odd corners. Besides being a labyrinth that's incredibly easy to get lost in, the tunnels are crumbling and unstable, and sometimes patrolled by tunnel police, who fine any urban explorers heavily. On top of this, it's possible there are other dangers in the catacombs. A camera was discovered deep in the catacombs by a group of explorers. On it was footage filmed by a man who left the tourist trail and filmed his excursion as he moved through the tunnels. Unlike a true cataphile, he had not studied maps or learned to keep track of his position while in the tunnels, and he quickly became lost. He moved faster and faster until he was running through the pitch-black tunnels. Then suddenly, he dropped the camera in a shallow puddle. He ran past it into the darkness, and then the camera lay there in the water, continuing to film until the battery died. No one knows what happened to the man. The TV show Scariest Places on Earth did an episode on a man who went down into the catacombs in search of the missing explorer, taking with him an experienced guide and a camera crew. If you can get past the hokey, spoopy narration, the actual content of the episode is interesting, and you can easily find it on YouTube if you want to see it. Because of the vastness of the tunnels, the possibility of finding the lost man were slim at best, but the guide was sure the man made it to the lower levels of the tunnels. He also believed the man must have died somewhere in those deepest levels, lost and terrified. The team in search of him even had trouble finding their way back out, and it took them 12 hours to traverse 6 miles of tunnels. Suffice to say, they did not find him. Some believe the lost man was chased deeper into the tunnels by something, be it normal or paranormal. I believe his own fear drove him on, and he ran through the tunnels madly searching for a way out. The tunnels inspire claustrophobia, which easily becomes panic when a person suddenly realizes they are lost, their light source is fading, and they have no way out of the darkness. Just thinking about it inspires a little spark of panic in my own gut. The ability of a place to evoke a reaction like mine is probably why the catacombs are featured or paid homage to in so many of our books, TV shows, movies, and games. The catacombs were most recently featured in the 2014 film As Above, So Below. If you're already claustrophobic, this movie will really take you to the brink of panic. The film follows a documentary film crew as they explore the catacombs, searching for the Philosopher's Stone. They find themselves trapped after a tunnel collapses, and the deeper they go, the darker things become, and not just because there is no light. In 2007, FearNet released the film Catacombs, about two sisters who attend a rave in the underground tunnels, something that is not unusual in Paris. During the party, they learn a killer named the Antichrist, because of the goat mask he wears, has been stalking the catacombs. You can imagine where it goes after that. The catacombs have also been featured on television shows such as Scariest Places on Earth, which I've already mentioned, and on Ghost Adventures. In fact, Ghost Adventures host Zach interviews the documentarian who went looking for the lost man for Scariest Places on Earth. Ghost Adventures also searched for the ghost of the architect of the catacombs, other angered souls, and demons in the tunnels, but they found nothing. Both shows are a little overly dramatic at times, but if you like that kind of thing, they are both entertaining TV and do show just how dangerous the off-limits sections of the catacombs can be. The catacombs have been featured in many books as well. The Maze of Bones by Rick Riordan features two people seeking a huge fortune by following clues that eventually lead them into the Paris catacombs. The book is part of a series called 39 Clues. Revolution is a young adult historical fiction novel by Jennifer Donnelly about a girl who is struggling with drugs, thoughts of suicide, and the way her family has fallen apart after the death of her 10-year-old brother. When her father takes her to Paris, she discovers a journal written by a girl her age, 2 centuries earlier, who describes her own tragedies. The girl ventures into the catacombs and is somehow transported to the time of the diary writer. Or is she? I haven't read this one, but it got good reviews, so perhaps I'll check it out in the future. One of my favorite Edgar Allan Poe stories, The Cask of Amontillado, features catacombs similar to those of Paris, though the story takes place in Italy. I'm including it here though because the descriptions of the catacombs in the story stayed with me since the first time I read it, and reading about the parts of the Paris catacombs that are off limits brought it screaming back into my head. I definitely recommend it. The catacombs have also inspired many game creators. Skyrim is full of Nord ruins, which include catacombs full of the living dead. The 2013 edition of Tomb Raider also includes catacombs that have been transformed into a prison for the insane, deep beneath a ruined city. Dungeons & Dragons campaigns are often full of catacombs for players to delve into, and undead for them to destroy. In all of this media, the catacombs are held to be a dangerous place. The fact is, they are. There may not be living corpses wandering the tunnels, but there are millions of corpses. Corpses who used to be living, breathing people. People whose names are lost, but are remembered as part of this massive grave system. It's possible the weight of all that extinguished life sparks a certain fear in those that visit the catacombs. The fact that a place that forces us to examine our own mortality is open to the public, laid bare for all to see, is what brings out our curiosity. The Morbid Curiosity podcast was produced by H. Lloyd. If you'd like to get in touch or suggest a morbid topic for me to talk about, you can tweet the show at Morbid Podcast or find us on Facebook and Instagram at Morbid Curiosity Podcast. If you like the show, please share us on social media and give us a rating on iTunes. Your shares and ratings help us grow our creepy community. Speaking of our creepy community, the MCP has joined the Belfry Podcast Network. Check out the other shows on the Belfry Network at www.thebelfry.rip. If you'd like to support the MCP, you can go to our website, www.morbidcuriositypodcast.com. There you'll find a PayPal donation button, links to all our social media, and other ways to contact us. We really appreciate your support. Also, if you have any questions for the MCP, please contact us using one of these ways. We'd really love to hear from you. We may even put out an episode with all the answers to your questions. My name is Hallie, and until next time, thank you for listening.